Science,
engineering,
medicine, chemistry,
physics,
biology, humanities, cardiology,
computer, public health, global
science communication.
Hello everyone, I'm Gareth Mitchell. It's September. We're coming back from our holidays, preparing for a new year of study, or lecturing, or research, or quite possibly all three. In other words, these are the final few days of one academic year as we gear up for the next. So, end of year it is, and we think an ideal opportunity for a recap. After 12 years in existence, this podcast is looking back on some highlights from our 172 editions so far, or 173 if you include this one. And guess what? We have a theme: underground, on the ground, and way above the ground. With ideas like that, no wonder we've lasted all this time.
The Imperial College Podcast.
But before we go back in time, let's just keep an eye on what's going on at the moment. A quick news roundup for you. Caroline Brogan is in the studio. And now, Caroline, this is kind of detective work going back to some earthquakes in Surrey. And new evidence has emerged, a bit more analysis. Tell me more.
Yes, so you might remember, Gareth, back in early 2018, Surrey and Sussex experienced a series of earthquakes. Now, they were quite small, but because they're so rare in the area, people were obviously understandably worried, and people were saying maybe they were caused by nearby oil drilling. Now, Stephen Hicks at Imperial installed some seismometers, which are instruments that measure sort of ground movement around the area. So he did this last year, and now the new data has been published to strongly suggest that the quakes were actually caused naturally rather than by nearby oil extraction.
How did they find this out?
So basically, he tracked a load of earthquakes using these seismometers that had happened during the swarm of earthquakes and ever since. And he found that the types and timings of the quakes, compared with the oil extraction activities, just didn't add up. So they painted a picture of pure coincidence. Steve Hicks is so sure of this that he said that if oil extraction did cause the earthquakes, then it did so by a mechanism that hasn't yet been discovered.
Right, we know what didn't cause them, but do we know what did cause these earthquakes?
Well, Steve said that if he had to guess, he'd say the quakes were probably caused by the ongoing collision of the African and Eurasian tectonic plates, which forms the boundary that's nearest to the UK and causes a lot of earthquakes throughout Europe.
All right, Caroline, thank you very much indeed for that. That is Caroline Brogan. Hayley Dunning is also in the studio, and it seems on this podcast, Hayley, we're not the only people looking back, are we? This is an amazing re-evaluation of the Antarctic that you've been following.
Yes, so we are going to take a little bit of a look back first. What researchers have done is re-evaluated some old data taken in the 1970s of research flights over a part of Antarctica. So these flights, they used this technique called ice-penetrating radar, where they were able to look down through all the layers of the ice right to the bottom of it and sort of map what was underneath and also what the ice itself looked like. But all that data was recorded on old 35mm film, so not very accessible. So they've had this massive project to digitise all this data, and now it can be compared to more recent surveys and get a longer view of what's happening in Antarctica.
And have they managed to get into any of that analysis, any of those comparisons? Or is it really, at the moment, it's all about the digitisation before they move on?
Well, they have started to get some insights. So in particular, they've looked at this glacier called Thwaites Glacier in western Antarctica. And that's known to be thinning. And by looking even further back and comparing what was happening in the 70s, they can see that it's actually thinning a little faster than they thought. And that means it might be more vulnerable to collapse.
Are there any other insights?
Well, they had 400,000 kilometres worth of data, so there's still a lot to go through, but they've been able to see some of the features under the ice. So it's worth saying that the digitisation was led by Stanford University, and part of it has been analysed by Professor Martin Siegert here, who himself has been trying to work with this data for more than 20 years, so this will really help him out.
So that was our news section. Now, Hayley Dunning remains in the studio to take us into our redux, into our playback of these items that we did a few years ago. And it's not that you completely forget about them, but it is amazing to revisit them. We're going to start underground, aren't we, Hayley? We're going down into some caves. Set this one up for us.
Yeah, this is one of my absolute favourites. So back in 2017, we lent the Imperial College Caving Club some of our kit. And they went down as they do every year, into the mountains of northwest Slovenia. They've been going there for decades, this club, sort of mapping and pushing and finding new caverns and caves and twists and turns. And so it's quite a beautiful thing to hear. And it's physics postdoc Jack Hare who led us through this adventure.
So I'm sitting up here on the plateau. It's 9 o'clock, the sun's risen. It's already getting pretty hot. I've put on all of my caving kit. I've got a layer of thermals, an extra thermal layer on top of that, and a thick protective oversuit. So I'm getting pretty hot even just sitting here. The thought of going down into a nice cool cave is extremely tempting. So I'm going to leave this beautiful sunny day with its clear blue skies, head underground and see what I can find. Sitting here in the darkness with my lights off at the bottom of one of the entrance pitches to Prima Donna. It's quite a drippy chamber, there's lots of water drops all around me. I'm looking up and watching DKP's light as he's on the relay hanging off the rope. He's just about to come down, so as his light swings around it provides the only illumination in the chamber for me. You want to go down?
Yeah, those ones look nasty.
Yeah, that's the old Slav rope, it doesn't go anywhere. See Dave descending rapidly down. It's a beautiful rock face, slight angle, so he can use his legs to sort of walk down almost vertically. And he's down.
See you.
We made it all the way down to Galactica, which is reputed to be the largest chamber in the old system. And now we're standing at the top of Galactica, looking into the void, and I'm here with Reese.
Should we chuck a rock down and see how deep it is?
Yeah, let's go.
I think I'll do a big Y hang with a traverse bolt for extra safety, and then straight down. We've just gone down the first pitch onto a little ledge. That wasn't particularly impressive, but then we climbed up a few boulders, and before us is just complete darkness. You can see maybe one of the walls, and then in the distance, nothing, and below you, nothing, even with our lights on the brightest modes. Normally when we throw stones down pitches, it's like a second or two, and you say, that might be like 20 metres. This was a good 5 seconds, 6 seconds, a long time to count.
Yeah, when Claire dropped a rock down, I thought that maybe she hadn't actually let go of it, because it was so long before it actually hit the floor. All right, what's the plan now?
One of us will have a fear piss, and then go and try and drop this seemingly unlimited pitch.
Gosh, do you think we have enough rope?
Maybe not. I have stored a Y hang at the top of Galactica, and descended slowly, placing bolts whenever I thought there'd be a rub point or whenever I got scared. The rope nearly reaching the floor.
How much rope do you think you put in?
Must have been close to 100.
And how far are you away?
Maybe 10 metres of rope more needed.
So how do you feel right now?
A little bit frustrated, but mostly excited. It's really one of the most huge places I've ever been.
The next day, the team return with more rope and finally get to sit inside Galactica.
I'm sitting here in the Galactica main chamber. This is the largest chamber in the system and the largest underground space I have ever been in. And this chamber is big, listen. Oh! Oh, yeah, I'm exhausted. It's been emotionally and mentally draining as well as physically draining. Now I can see in the distance on the far side of the chamber the lights of Reese and David playing around on the wall. And we're very deep underground now, so got to think about the way out and how exhausting that's going to be. But for now, I'm going to enjoy it, explore and help Reese take some photographs.
Jack Hare and his fellow cavers, and that was back in 2017. And what a wonderful atmospheric and sonic piece that was. Well, now we're going to go back to December 2015, and what an adventure this was in the scorching August heat during a mammoth cycling expedition across gruelling desert and mountain passes. A team of medical students regaled us with tales of their adventures cycling through Asia, from chin stitches, ouch, to mafia weddings. Andrew Chizewski heard about the quest.
So I'm here with two Imperial medical students, Chris and Camille, who have recently completed an epic 2,000-mile cycle ride across Central Asia, roughly following the historic Silk Road ancient trading route. Now, they were supported by Imperial's Exploration Board, which has been sending students on adventures around the globe for nearly 60 years now. Firstly, a big well done, guys. Tremendous achievement.
Thanks, really, very much. Yeah.
Now, you're here and fit and well, but I'm not going to say entirely unscathed.
Yeah, indeed. I think I'm the kind of person who's actually quite accident prone, as I found out, unfortunately. Yeah, there were a couple of times where I did actually have to go to hospital. Once because road rash got infected, and then another time where I fell off my bike, hit my chin, so needed some stitches. But hopefully now it's all fine and everything's healing up nicely. So,
and it's good to be medical students on the trip when these sorts of incidents happen, I guess, isn't it?
Yeah, so I was the expedition medic for the team, but as a whole team we used our heads as medical students, and it helped, certainly when we need to decide to get to hospital or when not to stitch a face and things like that.
Can you just give me some sense of how this all came together and how you prepared and planned?
Yeah, so it was quite spontaneous, to be honest. We went to a talk that Lorraine Craig, the head of the exploration board, held in last November. I was like, we need to do something. This is our last long summer as medics. So we kind of brainstormed, and what emerged out of it was, cycling the Silk Road, which was, I guess, quite a random thing, but yeah, everyone was happy with it, I think, in the end.
Can you just give me a sense of the conditions you actually faced out there on the road, or lack of road, as it sometimes was?
Yeah, I mean, the road quality, especially for the first leg in Kyrgyzstan, which is an extremely mountainous country, was absolutely terrible. Especially on one part called the Kegeti Pass. And all we knew about this mountain pass was that there at least had been a road going, or at least a track going over this. And when we finally got there, I mean, to call it a track was perhaps pushing it a bit. I think landslides over the years had put this road out of use, and the only way up was through pushing our bikes along through a scree slope. So it was pretty difficult. Other than that, for example, in the desert in Uzbekistan, we had to only cycle in the mornings and then the evenings just to avoid the hottest part of the day. Conditions were varied, but I mean, we managed just about.
I mean, I really enjoyed reading the journal that you posted online, and there were some very interesting encounters there. I mean, just to recall, it seems you were mistaken for criminals at one point, you featured on local TV, you opened a school, and even went to a mafia wedding. I mean, is there anything that really sort of stands out?
So I think the first memory of the whole trip really was being invited into this shepherd's hut in Kyrgyzstan on our absolute first night of the cycle tour. We did first mistake him telling us we were going to be massacred or something until we were able to understand he was invited into his house. I think that's one of the biggest memories I have. But also, I think the mafia wedding was probably the scariest memory of the trip, because like that type of encounter wasn't very rare, as in people like trying to like drink with you, and like they were quite in a way like forceful with their friendliness, which as British people you kind of had to get used to. But then when we all noticed they had like the same tattoos and they looked a bit scary, we were like, let's run away. And then after a bit of what they called Uzbekistan whiskey, it's not the easiest thing to do.
Wow, what a story. So good to go back and revisit that. You heard there from Chris Holt and Camille McClelland, and they were talking to Andrew Krzyzewski back in 2015. So let's continue with our recap with our Redux with Hayley Dunning. And Hayley, we've been down in the caves, we've been on that Silk Road cycling quest. We're going a little bit higher up now, aren't we?
Yes, finally into the clouds, and we're on Mount Everest. So I spoke to a researcher who spent 3 months working on Everest Base Camp. Her name is Dr Liesl Wandrag, and she was a clinical research fellow. So she was actually looking at how oxygen deprivation might affect people, which is relevant to patients in intensive care.
We know that patients on intensive care experience low levels of oxygen. Some patients do better with this low levels of oxygen than others do. And some obviously do better on ICU than others do, and we wanted to understand this a bit better. A good way to do this is then to study healthy subjects that experience a prolonged exposure to low levels of oxygen, such as at high altitude. We had about 24 core team members that we studied and 200 trekkers. So the trekkers trekked up to Everest Base Camp over a few weeks, whereas the core team members, the 24 of us, stayed at Everest Base Camp.
Can you describe the most recent finding from the study?
So what we wanted to do, we wanted to assess the extent of weight loss and body composition change from a hypoxic exposure, such as this period at altitude. The 10 base camp scientists stayed at base camp for the 3 months, whereas the 14 climbers clearly ascended higher. And of the 14, 8 actually summited Mount Everest. So we do expect, of course, as you go higher, you have a higher insult in terms of the hypoxia. And what we found was a substantial weight loss, but a very interestingly variable weight loss between the scientists and the climbers. And that after 8 weeks, the proportion of fat-free mass loss was nearly 50% greater than that of fat mass. So a lot of lean tissue loss. And this is what you also see in patients that are critically ill. Predominantly lean tissue is lost above fat mass. We then looked at correlation analysis, and we found predictors of lean mass loss. And these could potentially be used in future in nutritional studies or pharmacological interventions to see if we can actually target the pathways affecting lean body mass loss, and therefore some of the losses experienced in patient groups, for instance, the critically ill or elderly patients that have sarcopenia or age-related muscle wasting, or COPD patients.
So what's the value of doing research on Everest?
The other way to do these sorts of studies would be to study someone in a hypoxic chamber. But there are very few of these chambers around in the world, and they're enormously costly to run. Hence why it made more sense for us to go to the mountainside. And in addition to all of that, I think the amount of data that we were able to collect in 3 months would probably take you years to collect in a chamber. And I think it would be quite unfair to ask someone to sit in a chamber for 3 months non-stop.
What was your role in the expedition?
My day-to-day role on the expedition was that I worked in the blood laboratory, so I processed all the samples for blood testing. The Sherpas very kindly provided our meals, and I was responsible for snacks for team members if they were working all day long, and if the climbers came down from the mountain, that they had adequate snacks too. So as you can imagine, at some point I was either the most popular or the least popular person on the trip.
What surprised you the most about living on Everest for 3 months?
Initially, I think it's the sounds that are very different. So the constant crackling of the glacier, and you're camping on ice the whole time. Also the effects of the altitude. You're very breathless and tired at the beginning. You lose your appetite, and almost all of us developed a very dry cough during our time there. But there are also, sort of good surprises in terms of the scenery. We were surrounded by mountains that were just amazing, and all of the peaks were more than 7,000 meters. And the stars and the moon were just fantastic at night, and the sunsets and sunrises were just exquisite.
Were there any scary moments?
In the beginning, when we all arrived, we were all excited to be there, and it felt a bit like a working holiday. But it soon dawned on us that this is a very dangerous place, and that was when, weeks in, when unfortunately the first bodies of Sherpas and climbers were brought down the mountain. There were also a few people that became ill or had to be taken down the mountain, and there were some heli rescues at base camp. In addition to that, I think the day that our summit team left base camp to go do their final summit push was difficult for all of us, because these were your friends and they were now putting their lives at risk in an unpredictable environment.
So what kept you motivated?
I think overall it was the camaraderie and the friendships that formed over the 3 months. The scenery, for sure, that kept me motivated. And then getting to know the Sherpas, like I say, they really tried to make our lives as pleasant as possible during this time. And my other personal favourite, of course, that kept me motivated on a daily basis was chocolate.
Liesl Wandrag talking to Hayley back in 2017. So those were a few of the highlights for us over these previous 172 episodes. If you want to choose your own highlights or just dig back into the archive, you can. It's all there via imperial.ac.uk/podcast. And if you go over there, you'll also discover lots of other ways of listening to us. iTunes, YouTube, Spotify, Stitcher, and even Entail. And this is visual podcasting, so you'll have to give that a try. I'll leave you to it in that case. I'll be back in a few weeks. Thanks very much for listening, and goodbye.